Okay, now, when we sit down to think about an idea, a topic to argue about, it's a lot like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, if you remember that story, right? What happened with the story? Goldilocks goes into the cabin in the woods, and there's 3 bowls of porridge. The first bowl of porridge is what? Too hot. The second bowl of porridge is too cold. And then the third bowl of porridge is just right. You remember that story? Now, if we think about that, that's a good way to approach topic selection for the argumentative essay. When we talk about hot or a hot topic, what happens here, it evokes an emotional outburst. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with an emotional outburst? Well, if you flip back in your notes to what the word argue means, to persuade someone. So, if someone is yelling and screaming, right, you're not going to persuade that person to share your point of view. And these are hot topics. Okay? So, hot topics are centered on politics and religion. Hot topics generally are centered on politics and religion. Now, a lot of people say, well, hey, Mr. K, each time I watch the news, this is what they're talking about. And yeah, exactly right. This is what they're talking about. They're talking about politics, they're talking about religion, these hot button issues of the day, right? And you can't argue with someone who's yelling and screaming at you, because chances are if someone is yelling and screaming at you, in a matter of seconds, you're going to be yelling and screaming too, and then there's no persuasion going on. So we have to stay away from hot topics, okay? Perfect example of a hot topic is something that I never talk about, and that's abortion. Because within 2 seconds of saying that word, people are flipping out, right? Boom. Perfect example of a hot topic. Now, that next bowl of porridge was what? Too cold. What a cold topic is, it is one-sided. In other words, there is no one to argue with. That's an interesting idea, that there's no one to argue with. So if you imagine a cold topic, right, that would be like someone preaching to the choir. You've probably heard that expression, right? Preaching to the choir, standing on a soapbox and just beating their drum, just blip, 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 right? If you remember that third example about my cousin argued with me about why I should drink 2 shots of vodka each morning instead of coffee, right? Clearly that's someone being an alcoholic. There's nothing good about being an alcoholic, right? That would be a characteristic of a cold topic. It's one-sided. There's nothing good about the other side, right? Does that make sense? Right? You cannot argue about not wearing your seatbelt. Why is it impossible to argue about not wearing your seatbelt? Because there's nothing good about flying through a windshield when you come to a sudden stop and ending up on the pavement in front of the car, right? There's nothing good about that. So that's what we mean by cold topic. So that leaves the third bowl of porridge, which is just right. Now, what is the just right topic? It is one that avoids an emotional outburst and is two-sided. In other words, there's someone to argue with. Right? Does that make sense? That there's someone to argue with. Now, I know everybody's thinking, hey, Mr. K, can you give us some examples? And the answer to that question is yes. So let's take a look at some examples of hot, cold, and just right topics. Let's take a look at some examples here. These would all be hot topics. Why? Because anytime somebody touches on one of these ideas, what happens? People start yelling and screaming, and then there's no way to persuade someone to join your perspective, your point of view, if there's yelling and screaming. Now, do people yell and scream about these topics? Oh yeah, all the time. And what are they doing? They're not arguing, they're just doing what? Yelling and screaming. Plus, most of the time, people have a really firm stance on these topics like this. And for example, there's nothing you can say that is going to change my stance on these different topics. There's nothing you can say that's going to change my stance on illegal immigration, on universal health care, on impeaching the president, abortion, prayer in school. Nothing you can say, right? So can we argue about these? No. Can you yell and scream? Yeah, you can yell and scream. I'm not going to listen because guess what I'm going to do? That's what I'm going to do, right? I'm not going to stick around for that. Now, cold topics again, these are all one-sided. In other words, when we truly argue, there has to be two positions, two sides, right? And there actually has to be something good about both sides. So domestic violence, texting and driving, child abuse, alcoholism, racism, obesity, these are all cold topics because there's nothing good about child abuse. Nothing good. And people say, oh, that's terrible, Mr. K. Yeah, child abuse is terrible. That's why, what do we do with child abusers? We arrest them and we lock them up because we know that that's, our society shouldn't have people like that in it. Now, do these things happen? Yes. Is our world oftentimes a really bad place? Yes. Can you argue about it? No. Can you try to change it? Yeah, I encourage you to try to change it, but you cannot convince me to ever abuse my children. You cannot convince me to ever do that, right? That's why these are all cold topics. So now, the just right topics. And there's really a multitude of just right topics. These are just a few. The lottery, legalizing marijuana, teen curfews, raising the age to drive, school uniforms, homeschooling, lowering the speed limit, the draft, right? These are all just right topics because, why? There's two sides, and each side has good things to say, right? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, Mr. K, you're out there smoking reefer? You want to legalize marijuana? No, that's not what I'm saying. Marijuana, an interesting change from when I was growing up to today regarding marijuana. People have started to do a lot of research about marijuana and discovered that it's not as bad as people once thought. Marijuana has medicinal properties, medical benefits as well. And so many people smoke marijuana that you could charge $20 for a pack of marijuana cigarettes, and people are going to pay that, and you're just going to make so much money in tax revenue, right? So what did I give? I gave reasons for. Now, with marijuana, everybody knows that there's a big difference between marijuana and crack or crystal meth. There's nothing good about smoking crack or crystal meth. Nobody's going to ever say, whew, man, I just want to share with you something that has changed my life, and it is crack. It has made me the best person that I can ever be. If someone says that, you need to do this. Right? Because there's craziness. So these are all just right topics. So remember, when you select your topic, when you're going through the writing process, it can't be hot, it can't be cold, it has to be just right.